My name is Frankie Carrick. What is it like to have a near-death experience? When I was 36, my youngest son and I would find out it was both wonderful and terrible. I will always call William my miracle baby, as so many strange events combined to bring us back from the brink. But 4 years before this, at the start of this journey, I had dreamt a strange dream. I found myself coming down on the top of a tiny planet. The sky was edged with pink and blue-green, and behind that lay the darkness of space. A luminous spirit being that I recognized as Sai Baba was waiting there for me. As I floated down and landed, I wanted to run towards him, but instead he pointed me silently towards two figures some 4 meters away. There, I saw two little boys, one a half head taller than the other did, and standing very close together. I knew immediately that I was being shown two future children. I instinctively cried out, "No, please, no more children!" My circumstances could not have been worse. On my own, with 7 children, 5 under 4 years of age. My heart, damaged from the carrying of twins, had become progressively worse with the 2 subsequent pregnancies. Physically, I was a shadow of my former self, troubled also by back and joint damage. But, apparently unmoved by my pleas, the spirit being pointed to the boys again, and so I walked right up to them to try to discover if I could see what they looked like. I looked into their eyes, and saw only the stars behind us, streaming through their eyes. Sai Baba walked slowly away, and I watched him until he became almost too small to see, and then disappeared over the horizon. I woke up, disturbed and intrigued by this experience. Now, 4 years on, here I was, married, 35 weeks pregnant with my 9th child, and yes, I had already had the first boy from the dream, Max. My husband had announced that he wanted a girl both times I had become pregnant. I had warned him not to get too hopeful, as I believed that we would be seeing the 2 little boys from that vivid dream. A number of remarkable events occurred just prior to the birth of this 9th child, William. Heart trouble had become a pressing problem, and compression in my spine had led to the loss of some muscle in one leg, making walking difficult. I had woken up that day, feeling stressed and full of a deep sense of foreboding. In the morning, I clearly heard a voice telling me, "You must get to hospital." Where did this voice come from? Was it my own intuition, or was someone helping me? I did not know, but it sounded so insistent I felt I must act on it. The baby was not due for some 5 weeks, so how to be admitted to the hospital, some 1 hour's drive away? I had no pressing reason to go. Filled with a sense of urgency, and after some thought, I decided that when I got to the hospital, I would ask for help for the pain and difficulty I was experiencing with walking. So that's what I did, and insisted on being admitted for tests by a reluctant doctor. Later, when the doctors asked me what symptoms I was experiencing, I answered, "Just write down clapped out U, Brit Australian worn out sheep. That sums it up, I think." They laughed at this and ordered tests for later that day. Within an hour of admission, I experienced a hemorrhage. So that is why I had to come in, I thought, as I sat eating lunch later that day, feeling more relaxed. There were no signs of other problems or early labor. Problem over. After all, I was not due to deliver the baby for 5 weeks, so there was plenty of time now. But as I looked through the large plate glass windows at the sky outside, thousands of tiny stars started to rush towards me at breakneck speed. It felt exactly as if I were suddenly sitting in the cockpit of Star Trek's Starship Enterprise, hurtling through space. Just a really bad dizzy spell, I reasoned, and limped over to my bed to lie down. By now I was struggling for breath, not unusual, as this happened with most exertion now. But my peripheral vision seemed to be shutting down too. What was this? Dark clouds were gathering across my eyes. As I lay on the bed trying to breathe, another patient approached the bed and asked for a pen. "Are you sure you haven't got one?" she continued to ask, as I shook my head and gasped. No, not right now." She wandered off unconcerned, but I feared that soon I would lose consciousness. Desperately, I pressed the buzzer for a nurse to come. No answer. The bell was dead. Eventually, with a supreme effort, and now very little sight left, I whispered to the patient in the next bed to please call a nurse. One arrived in a leisurely fashion and asked, "What seems to be the trouble?" I managed to gasp, "Can't breathe, can't see." She looked like a gray blob surrounded by moving clouds. She remarked disinterestedly, "I had that last weekend. You've probably got a middle ear infection." I was stunned by this casual diagnosis. The situation was starting to look more and more comical. So many inexplicable delays. I would have laughed aloud if I had been capable. Here I was, I thought, fighting to stay conscious and keep breathing, and apparently it was all just so uninteresting. I tried to gasp to the nurse that my ears were fine. She then, almost absent-mindedly, reached out and took my pulse. Then, full of drama, she pressed my hand and cried, "Don't go anywhere! Wait here!" and rushed into the corridor looking for help, as apparently my pulse was over 200 and too fast to record. Ironic, really, that she should ask me to wait. I was like a beached whale, drowning in the air, and yes, definitely not going anywhere. At the precise moment that the nurse ran into the corridor, a heart specialist, apparently not normally ever walking those corridors, appeared in front of her and she literally crashed into him. He came into the ward and immediately recognized the symptoms of heart failure and assembled all the necessary equipment to do a rescue mission. I was told later how lucky I was. It seemed that the only other available staff on the ward that day was an inexperienced intern. He could not quickly out what was happening. I was told that a fatal delay may have occurred had this heart specialist not been walking down the corridor at that precise moment. Quickly, I felt a cold gel sensor pack slapped on my back, and people stabbing my toes asking me if I could feel them. But I was so cold and numb that I couldn't feel much anymore. I started drifting off and could only vaguely hear them now. I found myself floating down a long tunnel. I looked all around and was aware of a soft and mesmerizing light at the end. I wanted to rush towards it, but found it hard to move forward and could do so only by forcing myself forward, half swimming and half walking. Then I heard a distant faint voice cry out, "Sinus rhythm collapsing! We are losing her!" But I felt completely disinterested in this. I did not know whom they were talking about, and was annoyed at the interruption. Now I only had eyes for the wonderful glowing light at the end of the tunnel, which seemed to hold promise of great warmth and love unending. I felt so joyful and excited. All awareness of my body on the bed left me as I tried for some time to reach the light. I knew absolutely that wonderful things were awaiting, if I could only get to the end of the tunnel. The light now loomed larger, and I could see faint outlines of figures waiting there, beckoning me forwards. I wondered, who is waiting there? Is it angels or loved ones? I tried harder and harder to reach the end of the tunnel. Then, a very faint voice interrupted my travels with a tiny urgent, "Baby on board," and a pleading, "Breathe! You must breathe!" A nurse was apparently shouting loudly into my ear. This caught my attention. I stopped in the middle of the tunnel and wondered, who has a baby on board who should be breathing? Then I thought, perhaps it is me. Perhaps I am pregnant, and if I am, then I must go back. And reluctantly I turned around. It was so hard to leave that wonderful promise of all-encompassing love and warmth waiting in the light, and those light-filled beings waiting there. The return back down the tunnel was brutally sudden. I came back to consciousness to experience total chaos. Doctors were shouting, and my whole body was in pain. I felt icy cold, but I could see that I was indeed pregnant. My memories flooded back, and I knew I had many children and others who needed me to hold on. I fought to come back, and although the heart rhythm was still unstable, I immediately went into labor. Serious-faced heart specialists told me, "You can't have the baby yet. We will deliver in 2 weeks when your heart has settled down." I did not argue. I could see their point. But I knew from my previous 8 deliveries that this labor was not a trial run. So, exhausted, I steeled myself for a long night. Whether it was the right time or not, this baby was on its way. I was informed later that day that I had flatlined for some time, and that, had this episode happened at our house, some 1 hour's drive from the nearest hospital, both William and I would have died. I reflected on that urgent message in the morning. No wonder I had to get to hospital that day. How strange, the many delays that had led to the nurse colliding with the heart specialist. I realized that I had been somehow protected all the way through this crisis. I also felt enormous gratitude for the nurse who had shouted in my ear, because I realized that I had only turned back because of her prompting. At dawn the following morning, with labor well advanced, a grim-faced team of heart specialists and surgeons gathered to deliver the baby. I was hooked to a bank of heart monitors, and had needles in my feet, arms, and hands. The recalcitrant heart was still racing and wobbling around. Their ominous expressions told me that they didn't have much hope for our chances under anesthesia. "Would you like to leave any messages?" I was asked. "None," I replied. My husband and children knew I loved them. I told them that every day. Since seeing the two little boys standing together on that planet 4 years earlier in the dream, I felt sure that William, at least, would survive to be with his brother. As the anesthetic took hold, I felt totally at peace. After all, I had come close to the light and it was so wonderful, I had no fear of death left. William was delivered with only minor difficulties, apparently unharmed by his prenatal adventure in the Star Trek ship. Watch this near-death experience next about an atheist man who died and was shocked to learn he was wrong all his life.